Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. This is Jen Ross, your Agritourist podcast host. I had a very inspiring and deeply insightful conversation with Richard Andres, owner of Tantré Farm in Michigan. Richard is a farmer, a philosopher, and former carpenter. Well, I say former carpenter, but I am sure his carpentry skills come in super handy on the farm. Those are one set of skills I wish I had more of. So when I say my conversation was deeply insightful, that is probably an understatement. When I noticed in Richard's bio that he worked with the Arbor and Toronto Zen Buddhist temples, I figured that our conversation may go well beyond the economics of farming, and it certainly did. When I left the conversation with Richard, I felt a deep understanding about why he does what he does, and why feeding people and connecting with people through food is at the foundation of everything he does. From a successful CSA, upick, and meal program, to the farm education, he serves his community through food. With his wife Deb by his side, they are such a positive force in their community and with everyone they touch. I left my conversation with Richard conveying to him that he needs to write a book. The world needs to hear his unique wisdom and philosophies about food and farming. I encourage you to mindfully listen to this episode with an open heart. It will help to fill you. So how are you, Richard?
I'm fine, Jen. Yeah, thank you for making time.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for everything you do. I have a ton of questions, obviously. So I want to just start this out. I want to actually say your mission statement because I think it's pretty powerful. And I just want to put that out there up front. And then we'll be talking about all the aspects of it throughout this interview. But Tantre Farm's mission is to produce and distribute fresh produce while serving as an educational, sustainable, and social network for our surrounding community. We hope to achieve this mission through our CSA, farmers markets, farm to school program, local stores, local restaurants, schools, and other community connections. And I know you have a second part to that. Our goals at Tantre Farm are to produce fresh, healthy foods for the local community, provide quality of life for the farmer, and sustain economic viability for the farm with care and respect for nature's diversity. Well, thank you for everything you do. It's amazing, and I'm grateful for everything you do. Okay. It's very powerful. Yeah. First, I just want to start by the name. Where did this name come from?
Well, it was kind of an anecdotal digression in a lecture that was in the late 80s about mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh. And that the name is actually a story about a girl named Tantre that was about 4 years old. And it was kind of a story about from the mouths of babes, that Tantre was referred to as a niece of Thich Nhat Hanh. And so he was looking after her while her parents were working. And this is at Plum Village. And I'm not sure the date. Originally, I thought it was in the 80s. It might have been in the early 70s when they first got established over there after his exile. But he was looking after this little girl, and She made friends, but she didn't speak the language. She didn't speak French. She was about 4. She was playing with some other girls, and they got hot and tired, and they came back to the hermitage to get a drink, and Thich Nhat Hanh poured them all some apple cider. And the last course glass went to Tantré, and she didn't want to drink it because it was cloudy, and she refused. And then he said, "Well, that's okay. You can go and play, you know." And so she did. And she came back later, and she was very excited because when she saw the apple cider sitting on the counter, it was clear. So it was no longer cloudy. And she was exclaiming, she said, Uncle Monk, come and look at the apple cider. It's clear and beautiful. It's been meditating." And so Ty used this as an example of the simplicity of meditation, and that even a 4-year-old kid with no lectures or knowledge or thought was able to perceive what meditation was. And so that's how he began his talk, or maybe in the middle of his talk, this anecdote about mindfulness and what is mindfulness. And then, of course, the little girl, Tantre, drank this apple cider, and it was delicious, and she was happy. And he went on to explain that his routine and his schedule there, and how she might have come to think about what meditation was. But I think it was potentially just something in the air, something in the culture, and she knew what mindfulness was even without having any kind of explanation. So, and this is sort of the important part of Buddhist practice and Buddhist meditation. And, you know, we all are probably always wondering, well, what's the point of this meditation? And if nothing else, perhaps there's some clarity when we find some stillness, and we, enjoy our life better and help each other out better. And so that was an aspiration for the farm, and that, kind of settling in here on the land, doing simple work and finding clarity with one another, even though we might find things unpleasant or awkward or confusing. Eventually, if we wait long enough, maybe we can have some insight, some through mindfulness. So that was the reason for the name, and I've been explaining it
No,
in one form ever since.
It's a beautiful story. It really, really has some significance.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, that's a good
Absolutely.
starter.
Very profound. So tell me a little bit more about your background. You have an interesting background that led you in this direction. So if you don't mind, just give us a little history on you and how you got here.
Well, I had some ancestors. As far as my living memory goes, it probably goes back as far as my great-grandfather, who was an immigrant from the coast of Poland. He was a fisherman, and he came over here, I think, sometime in the 1890s, and he brought his bride, who was 20 years younger than him, and they settled in Detroit. And to my knowledge, he never owned a car, which is ironic because he grew up right through that boom time for the auto industry. He was a tradesman and a fisherman, and he had many friends around Detroit, and he would walk to visit his friends his whole life. And he took care of my father. And my father was a profound influence on my father because my father liked to walk. My father didn't want to commute to work. So as a teacher, he became a teacher, and he wanted to walk to work. So we always lived close to the school that he worked at, and it was within the community that we lived. And so it was a time in the late 60s that I was growing up as a kid, and then in the 70s, teenager, and then graduating high school in the early 80s, or 81. So those are the stories that I heard about my great-grandfather, and we came through some cultural economic times in the 70s, back to the land, the cultural, kind of consciousness that shifted from maybe the Renaissance, with all the radical activities of the 60s, all the profound movements into the back to the land, and to the questions of reciprocity or dependence on fossil fuels, and then the OPEC gas shortages in the 60s and the inflation. So there were some things that early on for me as a kid, maybe in 12, 13, 14 that were profound in terms of, well, yeah, we can go to the land, we can grow our food, we can make our own fuel, we can create a refuge for ourselves. So that was kind of formative. I got some little jobs or just outside of our little town. We lived in a little town, Plymouth, Michigan, and I had a job picking pumpkins and picking sweet corn and some long hours. And I had been a paper boy, but I hadn't done much austere work, physical labor. And, I ended up getting into that kind of kinesthetic intelligence that comes from those proportions of work and then that austerity for hours and hours, either through all the weather, whether it was rainy or whether it was cold or whether it was hot. And so that sort of tested me. It wasn't really pleasurable, but it was a job, and I earned money and I made money with it. So coming through public school, where the idea of being really perhaps college bound, or this aspiration for maybe, for lack of a better word, a brave new world of technology and science, and then maybe the disillusionment of that brave new world and the critique of that brave new world, and then going in the direction away from that, as I just couldn't buy in, as a college, going to college a while and then dropping out and going to meditation community, did a lot of manual labor. So again, the practice of meditation and devotional practice and work, basically.
What triggered that? I mean, so you decided, okay, I'm not going to do this college route, continue there. Why, why this meditation? Like, how did that come about? That's not, a lot of people wouldn't do that.
Yeah, just not being able to find my way in and having a critique of the corporate cultural economy. We were aware of climate change in the early 80s, the nuclear freeze movement. We, as a family, were never a supporter of the neoliberal economic agenda of Reagan, destroying all the unions, and then the free trade of outsourcing and becoming a global economy. There was a critique that I received that just I couldn't buy into it. And because I wasn't real successful with finding my way through college, I went to college because I wanted to study history and literature to create a deeper understanding of our complex problems that we didn't seem to be able to be capable of solving. And then I wound up washed out of there and in a meditation community in a totally different, actually a non-intellectual community. Within that community, it was encouraged not to focus in on the thinking, and get more into our heart and find a different sense of being through meditation rather than through always critiquing things and then wanting to fight and protest. So it was a different approach.
Do you feel that's what you got out of it?
That community was pretty cosmopolitan. People there, that was a wonderful, intimate group of people that were struggling to work together to build a different way of looking at things, different values. I think that's what I got out of it. Yeah, I think I got that. I would guess I would just add, there's some of the practice in Zen, or some of the practice in Korean Zen, which is what we were practicing, was Wado practice or koan practice. And so it's just holding a question in front of your mind or in your body. And it's just, in the case of Korea, it's just one question. In the case of, if you go and study koan practice in Japan, there's 1,800 koans, and there can't be resolved rationally or logically. And so when you attempt to answer rationally or logically, the teacher just asks you to go back and try it again. So essentially, it's a question you can't answer with, that you would answer any other question. So it's a question that maybe is unanswered or that can't be answered through thought. But I don't know if I ever resolve those questions or not. But it made me think that it's okay to have questions that aren't resolved. It's okay to have, just embrace the dualities that exist and just hold them in our mind, in our hearts, and maybe they won't be resolved. Birth and death won't be resolved. The the dualities in our life, and that's okay. That's maybe an energizing way in which to you know stay open.
So from that experience, coming out of that experience, um, what where did you lead from there?
Well, I ended up doing a lot of building and labor, and then also doing a lot of maintenance and repair on old buildings because we were renovating old buildings and making them into Buddhist temples. So there was three that I'd worked on: one in Ann Arbor, one in Toronto, and one in Chicago. And so it was kind of like real estate development. But um, a lot of the work was done volunteer and with a sense of mindfulness and work practice. So the work was work, but the work was also meditation, and the work was testing our ideals in a way, and testing our ability to get along with each other, and testing, we were stress testing. That's what I feel like. Philosophically, metaphysical Buddhism is very attractive, and there's all these wonderful ideas and philosophic contemplations, but in the end, the practice comes down to kind of getting stress tested. So going without food or water or sleep, those things tend to challenge us neurologically. Those things are kind of was part of the stress testing. And so yeah, we just had a big wild bunch of people that were coming and going from all bunch of different countries in Asia and Mexico. They were there for a variety of reasons, mainly because they were struggling with something. There was a struggle. There was death, there was divorce, there was disillusionment, there was every kind of struggle, young people, old people. So, and then, making space for each other in the fact that everybody had a struggle. And, if they were reacting to their own interpersonal struggle, making some space for them, if they were pissed off or angry or acting out, not taking that personally. That was the training. After 5 years, I wanted to go and do my own thing, and appreciated that training I had, but then work for a guy who was an architect that had helped on the building of some of those buildings. And he had volunteered his time, but he was a builder of passive solar homes, and he had spent 2 years out at Arco Sante, and I'd heard about Arco Sante in the 70s, which was the city of the future. It was solar powered, and it was built on the mesa outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. Paulo Soleri was the architect, and he was designing the city of the future. And the man that I started working for when he was in his formative years in the mid 70s, he was out there in between school, and he had helped out there and learned a lot. And I had heard about Arcosante when I was in high school, and I knew people that had gone out there to work on workshops, but I never went. But I'd been working with this carpenter architect for a while, and he had really good stories. He was a English major in college, and he had great stories, and he would love to tell all his stories about all the crazy stuff out there at building the city of the future, which is still there. It's still functioning. It's not completed, but it was an attempt at building a city without destroying the native landscape, with honoring the native landscape and living within the planetary limits is basically what it was. So that question of how do we live within the planetary limits was being addressed. Well, I was quite smitten by this fellow, and he was building these passive solar homes, and I just wanted to work with him. And so he had a little farm, and I lived out there out of my car, and I lived there a few years, helped him with his small business. We'd build like 3 houses a year, passive solar houses, thermal mass, did all his grad study. He had done all his grad studies on passive solar thermal mass. So it was very simple technology to keep houses warm in the winter, somewhat like the earth ships. So we were making these kind of earth ships around Michigan. And so owner builders would want to do something like that. And then, of course, I encountered a whole group of people, a whole sub community of people that were interested in that kind of thing. And so I just had 7 days a week available to help this guy. And he had a small family and little farm, and we would eat and live together. We struggled on this small business together. And I worked with him for, I don't know, seemed like maybe 10 years.
Wow.
In that time, we built a kind of one of these earthship homes for some professors just outside of Ann Arbor. And they said, while we were building it, oh, you should come and eat dinner. And I did. And we talked, and they liked me. And they said, well, the lady across the road's selling a piece of land. Maybe you'd be interested. And I looked at it, and I just thought, oh, this is impossible, because I could never afford it.
How many acres?
It was 40 acres and a house. And it turned out, well, she and her family were Seventh-day Adventists, and they lived here on the land with that kind of Christian philosophy, kind of a ecological and health philosophy that, took inspiration from the Bible in that way. And so there was another cultural, economic thing that, I ran across, that when I explained what I wanted to do on the land, she was very positive and very interested in having me have this farm. So we made a deal.
So what did you tell her you wanted to do at that time?
Well,
what was your
I
vision?
waltzed every person I knew through this farm. I mean, friends and family. And I said I wanted to grow produce and make a business where I wouldn't have to commute to different jobs. We had been working on other people's dreams for a long time. And I said, I want to find a livelihood on this land and, outside, and I don't have to commute, and I can serve my local community with vegetables, organic heirloom vegetables, and, see what I could figure out as to how to do that and what that required, what kind of inputs that required to generate that food. And very quickly, I found that it needed a lot of human input, my own time, and then the time of other people too. So the gardening ends up being a lot of hands-on work at the scale that we do it, and then going 4 seasons. What does that require? So discovering what that required. And this is the days before. This was in 93 I bought the land, but we didn't have the internet. There were some books like Elliot Coleman, and
Yes.
we had a local chapter of organic growers, but we didn't have the internet where there's huge instruction now and huge knowledge now that you can just learn so much. And we didn't have the mentors really either locally that were market gardeners, but I had explored and met some mentors and worked with some folks that were market gardeners that helped me. So it was limited. And so that's where part of the story here.
Did this woman who you made a deal with her, so she had moved away and then you had this house and farm basically?
Yep.
And was it a working farm before you took it over, or was it just land?
No, she leased it out to a bachelor farmer.
Oh,
And I got to know that guy really well.
Okay.
We would trade. He and I traded. He would give me manure and I would clean his barnyard. So,
Hey,
but it
whatever
turned out
takes.
he had a lot of manure because his spreader was broken down for years and he just never got around to fixing it. He was pretty laid back. And it turned out his father had grown up in this house that I bought. And so his
Oh,
family was very much part of this community for 3 generations.
okay.
So I got to know him and all the stories that he had, but he wasn't a market gardener. He wasn't a gardener. He was more for cattle. He did more with the cows and dairy.
When you first took over, over the land or part of the land, what were the first things you did? How did you approach this project?
I was ready to be done being a carpenter, but I knew I needed to keep the wolf away from the door. So I maintained that job. I was in and out of that job and other jobs too with other guys I knew in the area, helping them out. But I would have big blocks of time, in the spring. The spring that I moved uh, in '94, I figured out kind of on the back of my shirt sleeve in about less than 1 minute that I could make enough selling potatoes, organic potatoes, to a natural food store that I could pay my mortgage. But my mortgage was really cheap at the time. It was super cheap. It was like $550 a month. It was ridiculous. Um, and I kind of lucked out with that. But I didn't need much money. So I figured out the potato thing. I went down and I plowed up a couple acres. It had been in hay for 30 years, so I plowed up a couple acres and put some potatoes in by hand.
How'd you
And
harvest them?
I harvest them by hand, and then I start
Yeah, it's one
taking
of
them
my
into a
favorite
natural.
things.
Yeah, I had to weed by hand. I pulled all the bugs off by hand. I didn't have a well here, so I didn't water anything. The grass from this old hayfield came back, and of course, it grew right through the potatoes.
Yeah.
So it was rhizomes growing right through the potatoes, and I was ripping the grass out all summer by hand. And a friend of mine had a little rototiller, so I was rototilling in between everything. It was more work, more trouble and work than, but you can see, the practice of austerity. I just spent hours out there, and I was kind of betting my life on the scene. I think when it was all done, I had 2 acres of potatoes. I probably harvested maybe 1,000 pounds of them. I put them in big burlap bags, 100-pound bags, and I was bringing them into the store, and they couldn't lift them. And, I was used to lifting them, so they said, you got to put half in the bag. I hardly made any money, but I, I, at the end of the year, I had a party. A friend of mine that I was trading carpentry work for mechanical work. I had a, I had a Ford tractor that was shot, and he was helping me rebuild it. And in the course of that, I'd watch his kids and do carpentry around his place. And then he said at a certain point, oh, my sister's coming to town. She's a wilderness camper, and she's a single gal, and maybe you'd like to meet her. So I did, and I invited her to this potato picking party, and she was a lot of fun. And she was teasing one of the guys at the party that he couldn't throw a dirt clod to save his life, or he couldn't hit a barn with a dirt clod if he was standing inside. She was laughing, and in the middle of her laughing, he threw a dirt clod right at her. Now she was about 20 yards away, and it went perfectly in her mouth as she was laughing, and she got a mouthful of dirt. And that was the potato picking party. And then we kept corresponding with each other. Then I kind of talked her into moving out here about a year later. We talked on the phone a lot. And um, so I guess that first year was good, even though I didn't make any money. I got the very important person in my life. So,
So this is
you
Deb.
know, yeah. So this is Deb. And so,
And also, though, the education, just from what you did that first year, that was a tremendous amount of education just to learn the real workings of this.
yeah. Well, again, I figured out in about less than a minute that I could make a budget, but the reality didn't work out at all that way. And it was discouraging enough that, um, working alone and just getting sick of eating potatoes and, feeling foolish, it's very discouraging. But I have to say that every year we're faced with that same issue. That issue has not gone away in one level or another. But that's to me the most important lesson. If I would ever tell anybody what's the most important thing you need to know, is you just need to know to have a vision and persist. And if you need a broader vision or a different vision, get it, because that's going to be the thing that can kind of keep you going when you're totally having a failure.
So what happened in year two? So you did your potato thing in
Yeah.
the first season. And how did you evolve? I know you have a pretty successful CSA. When did that come into, I don't want to skip, but was that something that you soon pursued? I mean, a
No,
CSA also is
no,
not easy.
no. It can be easier if you don't jump in right away. And so we didn't jump in right away. And I didn't have the skills to grow the diversity that was needed. And I needed to have some experiences. And I met and visited other people that had been market gardener farmers for decades. And one of the fellows that I met was from southeastern Minnesota, Steve Schwinn. His farm, I think it's the Earth and Path farm out in Oak Center, Minnesota. And I just wanted to, I was out there because I was visiting my in-laws. And, Deb would go back at Christmas, or she'd go back in the summer, different times. And so when I went back there, it gave me a little ways to, you know, get away. And I did really enjoy my in-laws, but I also needed to get away and do something. And so I could volunteer for this guy. And he'd been in business since the early 70s. So he was one of those initial back to the land people from the late 60s, kind of dropping out. He had been studying to be a doctor, but he didn't want to go into that. He soon quit, and he just managed to make this little farm work, and it was quite a dynamic place. And I love going out there and seeing what he was doing with hand tools, wheel hose and hose, and I really learned a lot. And he grew every vegetable there was and had an orchard and planted everything on contour and everything in proportion nicely. And he was also a woodworker, and we'd sit down and have a meal together, and I could sit down and talk with him for 4 hours straight and just wander around that farm with him working. And I appreciated him, and but that was very important to go and do before I started kind of doing exclusively trying to earn a livelihood from this land and make the farm pay for itself. So that, in other words, trying to bootstrap a livelihood from a farm is difficult because of there's a lot of infrastructure to put in, storage and cooling, like water, tractors,
Yep.
or if you're using livestock to plow, livestock. So it's just huge, for a first generation. So we didn't get started until 2001 on the full-time CSA. And I kind of had a dream team of guys that showed up. There were 3 guys that were a dream team. They were like the most focused, best driven, and totally different in terms of their personalities. It was like this perfect harmonic balance of like tension. And it was just a wonderful start, because we were going for it. But before that, I'd still worked as a carpenter on and off, and Deb worked as a teacher. She'd gotten a job out here, and she was teaching school. And she got to be the chair of her department within 4 years. Nobody wanted that position, but she was just there all the time. She would spend all this time after school. So, It was just kind of nuts. I mean, like she just would spend so much time with those kids. There was never a kid that went through her class that didn't measure up. She didn't let anybody slide through. But she spent, she'd leave here at whatever 6 in the morning, and she wouldn't come back till 8 or 9 at night when the custodial staff was shutting down the school, and then she'd come back here and correct papers, you know, and then on the weekends correct the papers. And it's like she loved it. She loved teaching. And so that's sort of what she did. And, we were both a little bit older. We were in our early 30s. And so, that was sort of our getting to know each other and getting our rhythm of life here time. And we weren't married at the time. We got married, about 2 years after she moved here, and then we had a kid about 3 years later. And that was the year we started the CSA. So we didn't even have a dog here. But we had the kid, we started the CSA, and we got a dog all in the same year. And we got a dog that was a dingo dog, and my mom was worried that the dingo was going to eat the baby, So she was telling us she just watched this movie about the dingo eating the baby, and why would we get a dingo dog? Well, we wound up with this dog. But we started the CSA that year, and it went pretty well. It was a 25-week season, and we just went all out on it. And
how many customers did you have the first year?
We started with 7. And I think by the end of the year, we wound up with 50 because we prorated. And we deliver our boxes to the Ann Arbor Farmers Market.
Oh, okay. So it was all delivery. It wasn't pickup at the farm.
There was some pickup on the farm, yeah. And then we did, eventually, I think that might have been the year we were going to Chelsea Market too. We delivered to Chelsea Market too. So we deliver. And I basically had read some studies by Elizabeth Henderson and Robin Van Ian. And they had said, talked about the most popular vegetables. And so we just targeted the most popular vegetables, made sure we had sweet corn, potatoes, onions, lettuce, green beans, things that people could relate to. And we tried to put them in the box constantly, in addition to the arugula and the cauliflower and the zucchini, and the less popular stuff. And then we tried to do things that you couldn't buy in the grocery store, like purple cauliflower or Romanesco or, heirloom vegetables. So we really tried for that. We really tried for uniqueness. And so we were, in other words, we were kind of testing ourselves. We were kind of testing our abilities. And we weren't always good with things. We made a lot of mistakes. But we had all this time, and then that was September, and, one of my guys, David, was saying, yeah, they just flew an airplane into the Twin Towers. And I was like, oh. And then news came along, oh, they flew another one in. And that was our first year. And then our baby was born about a week later. So that was quite a year. And the second year, my whole crew had quit, so I had to come up with another crew.
Oh, that's
but
disappointing.
We, well, they went. One fellow went to Colorado, one went out to Australia, and another one went to grad school.
Oh, wow.
So, but I came up with some people that were around, and we always had room for people here to stay here. So people stayed here. We ate together. We inspired each other. The food was important, very important to cook for one another. So everybody had a job to cook for one another. And so And people liked cooking because it meant they could get out of the field. They'd get out of the field work. They could come and cook. And then they could try their dish out on people. So then I started to think, food access. The main issue with food access is maybe we're not hungry, but also we're not cooking for one another. Part of food access is maybe we've just gone so corporate that we don't cook for one another. And if we had, families or some kind of group that would cook for one another, maybe we would eat better because we would enjoy cooking for each other as kind of a selfless act. And to me, that just seemed like a lot of the access is, whether you're wealthy or you're poor, we just get so busy with things that we're not able to carve out that autonomy. And we ate mainly vegetarian, although Sally Fallon had just come out with her book, Nourishing Traditions. And one of the guys was really interested in her knowledge. And so we got exposed to that. So we've tried to carry that on. We've tried to carry that value on throughout the years. And so we live and work with pretty much everybody that is working here. Most everybody lives here. Since that time, well, we started in 2001 with the CSA, so we've been going since then.
Were you one of the few CSAs in the area when you started? Because obviously CSA is a bigger thing now.
Yeah.
The types of CSAs. I know, I saw, you have an immune booster CSA and you have a few different variations, but how has it evolved and how has the competition impacted your CSA?
We never had to advertise for a CSA. And it just it was, the thing that we were focused on as a main goal. And, we do farmer market and a little bit of wholesale too, but that was our main goal, was not selling to national natural food stores or regional natural food stores because they're so big. I found that they really didn't care. And so, I couldn't make a business out of that, but the CSA I could. And it felt more grassroots. So, we have some members that are still members for 20 or 25 years here. So
That's amazing. You're feeding your local community. So
yeah, there weren't a lot of CSAs in this area. There might have been one or two, but now we do have more, and we have other people that are doing shares, amalgamated shares of several different farms. I'm getting to be kind of an old man, and if we need to share members or the market, then that's okay.
yeah. How many members do you have on average?
Well, we've been about 350 for the last probably 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, or more.
That's impressive.
And during the pandemic, we went up to 500 full
How'd that,
season, and then
how'd that feel? Was that a
we
lot?
did 200. We did 200 of the immune boost share, and the market got shut down locally here because of they were worried about social contact. So we got organized with some growers and we started all just putting it into a multi-farm share. And that worked for a couple months. And then we that's what the immune boost morphed into. It was a weekly sign up. And then we used the food hub as a distribution point there where people could drive and have no social contact. And we could put a box of food in the back of their car. So it was a seamless adaptation between farmers and the public. And we really saw a huge thing happen there. That could happen again. We just, energy is just so cheap. The whole economy is driven by all this cheap petroleum. If that ever goes away, we might see a different interest in local food. So that was a huge increase for our business. Also, the recession of 2008 was a big time. And then the slow recovery from that. We had just kids from all over that wanted to come and work here. So, you can see the collective conscience, how that changes on a global scale and a local scale, cultural levels. Um, we see these different times. And so, it's like different seasons in a way. And so, we've just enjoyed, a lot of business at different times because of, the way the world changes. We're going through some more changes, um, and the inflation jitters and income and people not being able to find, a good job. And how do we make this economy that is so financialized into something that can actually support the working class? Again, questions that don't have easy answers, and maybe they don't even have an answer.
Correct.
Or we have to create the answer ourselves and come up with a totally different paradigm for our economy.
You have a strong CSA for the most part. It's known in the community.
Yeah.
You have a good customer base. You're really good at what you do there. You also you do upick. You have people come to the farm and
Yeah, that's really the most ideal thing for us, is to have.
Yeah, why do you say, I mean, because I've interviewed some farmers who have, and I'm not talking about big strawberry farms, but they're doing upick vegetable and they have scheduled times for people and they've built tremendous businesses around that. And, the focus is, I'm spending time on the farm. I'm not, washing and doing all this and traveling to farmers markets and bringing back product that's not sold and all the waste involved in that. So upick is definitely, but obviously people have evolved in how they're doing it. So I'm just curious about your thoughts about on upick and what your experience is.
Well, I think, you know, maybe in that mission statement, there was something where we like to see people come to the farm and harvest their own stuff. I mean, in this society, anybody that's a member is usually, fairly professional. Maybe they have a little time they can come and harvest. It could be in the case of the strawberries that it's part of a bucket list, an annual bucket list. We're going to go and get our strawberries. We're going to go and pick our apples. We're going to go and blueberries. And, um, I, you know, but, the question is, what about if you just came out and got everything you eat? You just come out and harvest everything you eat. And there are some CSAs that the farmers don't harvest. Their membership comes out and harvests rather than the farmers harvest. So you coordinate a group to do that for each other. And so, is that an important or meaningful activity? And I think it is. And I think getting people out to harvest their own vegetables, to me, is a great privilege and opportunity, rather than throwing the burden on a disesteemed immigrant community that, is just trying to come and earn a living. If we could do it ourselves, if everybody that eats would harvest their own, even if it's just a symbolic level, that to me is an important level in terms of trying to establish that relationship. And ideally, we're 26 miles out of town. We're ways out of town here. Our upick is a couple miles from town, which is part of the green belt. It's preserved land that the taxpayers, Ann Arbor and the surrounding townships, have decided they're going to buy developmental land. And so that's a little closer. You can actually ride a bike to that site. And in that same vein, it's that sort of intention of, our food comes from over here. When we have wastes or composts from the city, they can come out to the country and then be reintegrated into this food shed. So to me, that's pretty ideal. That's a pretty nice way of planning things, just practically speaking. So having a upick or having a U-Harvest CSA or by the pound or however you organize it, to me, that's the greatest thing. It's so much of, I think, what people are worried about is, well, what happens, if I can't earn a bunch of money and afford a big car, driving around. Well, what might happen is you could afford a bike and ride out to the country and do it yourself, and maybe there'd be a better balance to our lives rather than this food coming from all over the globe that's destroying our ability to produce it. I think that's a privilege. I don't think it's a sacrifice. I think it's a privilege, and it's not a sacrifice. And I think, when we try to do things in a more ecological way, I think that's the way we have to frame. I think that's a helpful way of framing the argument, is that this is a great opportunity to correct so many problems that we're facing, and levels of companionship. And I never see anybody sad when they come out to pick strawberries. Everybody's happy. I mean, we get a grumpy kid once in a while or disappointed, but even the kids are so happy.
Yeah.
So, there's just so many things that are a positive about that. And having that piece of land close to town was a wonderful gift for us, and being close to those people.
So you also, you have a few things that you mentioned on the website. So the Harvest Kitchen, those are more prepared foods. And is that yours? Is that something you're a part of?
Well, we bought it from Mary Wesselwalker. She had developed this business because there was a CSA, Ann Arbor Community Farm, and their members pretty much said, well, we like the vegetables, but we don't have time to cook them. Is there somebody that could cook these vegetables? So then Mary took on 25 or 30 shares, and she cooked and just doubled the price of the CSA. So it went from a sliding scale of like somewhere between $700 and $1,800 to like $3,000. And she'd make prepared foods for people.
Wow.
And well, that to me sounded pretty smart. She ran that business for quite some years, and then wanted to start a family, and the business had kind of changed in a way to prepared meals for people and delivery. She needed a place to move out of her original kitchen. She was paying pretty high rent, and so we just said, why don't you come out to the food hub? And then she got to the point where she wanted to get out of it, so we bought it from her, and then we just paid her over time. We had some pretty good chefs come and work, and then we did prepared foods for a business over in Ann Arbor. It was a engineering firm that wanted to have farm to table meals for their staff, and that was carried on for a year or two, and that was a good core budget. And then some catering and subscriptions, people could order. So that's what that ended up being. And so it sort of was the original vision for the food hub, was a value added year-round, value-added process year-round for local food, local vegetables and whatnot, rather than just a seasonal bucket list. We're actually trying to like make something that would work for the community and the local growers. So that's what it is, and it's still going.
So that's more of a commercial kitchen setup?
Yeah, those are commercial kitchens that we had got into the Food Hub project in 2011. I had some kind of a vision for creating a year-round, value-added processing site, production site. So we bought a 16-acre site just north of Ann Arbor, out in the country, and it was an old farmstead. We built some kitchens and a brinery. So the brinery is fermented vegetables. And ironically, the fellow that runs that was one of the first guys that helped me with the CSA farm.
Oh,
So he
really?
was one of my first dynamic crew members.
Which one
And
was
then he
he? The
won.
one who went to Australia? The one who
He
went
went to
to
Australia.
Colorado? Okay, he was
Yeah,
the Australia
Australia.
guy.
Yeah, he had traveled around. He's probably, if you were to write his story, he would be like the modern version of Huckleberry Finn or something, on par with Huckleberry or Tom Sawyer. He would fit right in, actually, and I think it could be a really popular cultural icon there. But he started this fermented vegetable business. He got into a lot of stores and regionally and then also nationally. So his business is there, the Harvest Kitchen business is there, and then some other businesses that are being accelerated in those kitchens. So there's a kitchen and a bakery there.
That's terrific. So
Um,
it's like an incubator for.
yeah, it's something like an incubator, but um, these businesses, when the fermenting business showed up, they had already been in business 5 years. And the Harvest Kitchen definitely had been in business 5 years. And there's another broth business that was in business for 5 or 10 years. So these were businesses that needed some support, but they didn't really need incubating. They knew they'd been knocked around quite a bit in the economy enough to know that what they needed to do. So that's what that place is.
Do you ever do farm to table dinners or bring people out for meals at the farm?
Yeah, we do cooking classes. Um, we do edible farm walks. We did one of my high school teachers' daughters came out here and did a edible farm dinner. So we had
Nice.
different stations. The outstanding in the field had been in our neighborhood, and a neighbor recommended us. So we did that. We've done that. I think this is our third year we've done that one.
What is your experience with them?
Well, we do it at the upick site because
Okay.
we have a large barn there. I think it's like a 40 by 80 barn. So
Wow.
for 2 out of those 3 years, we had rain for both those nights. So we just made sure that barn's nice and clean, no pigeons, no bats, get them all out of there before we start drinking wine and um, farm to table. So yeah, it's good. I mean, again, I think it's a wonderful way for people to come and celebrate the farm, even though it's just like a 1 day event. People remember it and they try it again and again. The chefs are really energetic and to me, I mean, they're really they do a wonderful job with the food. Again, it's it's cultural. It's an annual event, and it puts food and ecology and soil and the land in our conscience. And the more constant that occurs, I think the better we are going to be able to deal with things.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of what I would say about it. The nice things I'd say about it, and just people be interested. We have a lot of good conversations. Yeah, people are curious and want to know about the farm. So
That's good. I mean, that's what
yeah,
you want to that's what you want to happen, you know.
it's a fancy meal. It's a fancy meal.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes, it's top dollar.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But you're
Yep.
paying for the experience too. So look, I feel like there needs to be all different ways to get people connected.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there are many different ways we can do it, and that's one of them. So,
Mm-hmm.
if,
Yeah.
and those people are taking the time, so,
Mm-hmm.
you do what you can to connect to them. So if someone came to you, a young farmer and asked for some advice, someone who was aspiring to go and get into farming today, different world than when you entered into it, What type of advice would you give them? What would you tell them to think about?
Oh, people do ask me that question, and I generally start by saying, grow what you like to eat, or what you really like to eat. Because then there's that, at least you have that. And then if you want to curse it by making money, then go ahead. But it's just going to be a curse. I think also for the long term, develop whatever it means to create a land ethic. So looking at, some of Aldo Leopold's writings, the Sand County Almanac, or Wendell Berry, any of his critical thoughts. They're looking at economy, they're looking at culture, they're looking at the earth, the land, the ecosphere, developing an ecological conscience, looking at the ecosphere as the template in which to measure everything, that everything's connected, and that we're a part of it. We need to figure out a better balance in terms of our destruction. And I think those are important elements long term. That this potentially is a path towards health and healing and creating a better world. Obviously, there's some large economic entities in this world that are just using the air and the water as a dumping ground. Eating good food and working physically, we get tired, we can have a rest, we get good food. To me, I would just say, yeah, it's worth trying on a small scale. If you don't want to have a big CSA or try to really be a hotshot entrepreneur, that's fine. Feeding friends and neighbors, feeding each other, that's good. But knowing that we're part of a whole, that collection of creating, a larger change for what we're going through right now, the stresses of this time.
So, one final question for you. Why do you love farming? What keeps you doing it?
Well, I don't know how to answer that exactly.
Whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, part of it, we work with a lot of people, and people keep me going. You know, there's every kind of person that shows up here, and because we have this farm, we interface with a wider community. In Buddhism, we talk about the three jewels, the Sangha, Dharma, Sangha, Buddha. The Sangha is a critical jewel in terms of keeping us going, the community of people that keep us going, or the community of all beings, the bacteria, the larger animals, and the earth itself. So, but sometimes on a psychic level, just having that person around that, helps us to reflect, for me anyway, reflect about my situation. So that direct connection with people is really good. And just the gift and the treasure that, my life has been with the people that, are here, that, we have a chance to love each other, love the land, also nature, the perennial nature that is in the soil, that's in the forest, in the grasses, in the wetlands. If nature is our template, if nature is the way in which we measure all things as a farmer, we're grinding money out of the soil. But there are many areas on our farm that are wild and that are developing in their own way. They're developing perennial bushes and trees, plants and animals and birds and pollinators. and soil fertility, trying to know that that is an investment for the future generations, whether it's a human or whether it's, a frog or a bird. We have been fortunate in which to make investments in land around us to just watch it be restored. Nature, if you talk about restoration agriculture or regenerative agriculture, that's the natural world. If we step back from it, it will restore itself. Even without our effort, it will restore itself. So that idea makes me feel at peace. If there's a lot of areas that I'm watching over the years or decades here and how they've changed because they're not monocultured and sprayed with glyphosate. They're not deserts. They're diverse and they're full of life. So looking at those type of things for me is really important. And that's sort of like at this stage in my life, that's to me is a great thing that I would, if there was a love or why would I stick with it? That would be why, because, there's a lot to learn. And if we have some bugs in our collard greens and they're full of holes, we have an opportunity to take them to market and say, well, we didn't use the organic sprayer. We didn't use the spray on these. So this is part of the natural world. So
exactly.
It engages that conversation. So,
yeah.
And it's a challenge to sell dirt. It's a challenge to sell insects, but it's part of what we're sharing here. So
Pretty amazing, Richard. I'm grateful that I had an opportunity to speak to you today. Have you ever thought of writing a book? I talk to people about farming and sustainability, but obviously the philosophical approach and the way you live it and the way you've engaged people personally and through the business of farming is pretty profound. I hope I would love to read a book if you wrote it because I think you have a lot to say in a very different way than other farmers. So, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate this conversation.
And, well, we write a newsletter.
That you're doing. Okay. Well, maybe we can, you can transition that into something. But I just feel like there's a lot here, a lot of dimension here, and not just a how-to book on farming, if you know what I mean. So thank you.
Yeah.
I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. As we are learning from many of our farmers and entrepreneurs, strong connections help propel our visions. Through my interview with Lisa Chase from the University of Vermont Extension and Vermont Tourism Research Center, I was connected to an exciting and new organization called the Global Agritourism Network, or GAN for short. The Global Network is made up of agritourism stakeholders from around the world. They include farmers and ranchers, researchers, educators, community planners, policymakers, agricultural service providers, and tour operators, among others. It is currently free to join, so if you have any interest in agritourism, check them out at agritourism.eurac.edu/GAN, or just Google Global Agritourism Network. The link will be in our show notes as well. You never know, this global network may help you take your agritourism vision to the next level.